Student housing is such a unique industry. The more unique an industry is, the more important it is for that industry to have a resource and a platform to share ideas and data, to determine best practices, and a platform to simply promote networking among the professionals in that industry. That's what we are setting out to provide with Student Housing Insight. But what's even more unique about the student housing industry is how unique those professionals are. They want to make a positive impact on the students and the university communities they serve. They understand they have an opportunity to touch the future. They come to work every day looking for ways to make that future bright. If you're one of those people, come be a part of Student Housing Insight. All right. Welcome to ShopTalk, everyone. For July 11th, this will be the last one for this academic cycle. If you can hear me, if you would, just put something in the chat so I know that we're working well. All right, looks like we're working. Well, guys, I hope you're off to a great summer. It's been it's been an interesting one for myself. It seems like between family vacations and all the other things that go along with being a student housing professional during the summer, that June went by really, really quick. So anyway, but wanted to jump in really quick. And I know a lot of folks are jumping on, and we're planning to, we made an announcement through email and some social media stuff that we had a segment today with John Armstrong from the University of Connecticut to talk about preparing this summer for this upcoming fall as it relates to the potential for campus protests, because we certainly saw a lot of that at the end of spring. Unfortunately, some unforeseen circumstances came up, and we've had to wipe that from this Shop Talk. And I'm going to try to do something independent from Shop Talk to get some other folks together and try to do something before we get into September. But just wanted to let anybody know that was tuning in specifically for that we will not be having that segment today. But we do have a lot of other great information. I want to bring Dave to the stage with NMHC. Dave, how are you doing?
I'm hot. It has been ridiculously hot here in DC. I think I've lived here almost all my life, and I've never seen this many days over 100 degrees. It's been, I thought I would have moved to Austin, Texas. In any case, and I can see somebody posted hot Atlanta here from Angela, but man, it's been toasty here. So we're trying to make do, stay inside, stay cool.
Same here. Yeah, it's like somebody turned the furnace on 3 weeks ago, and it hasn't let up at all. So, well, hey, as we mentioned, we do have chat. We'd love for you guys to, if you've got any comments or questions for our panelists today, make sure that you put it over there in the chat on the right hand side. And then, of course, if you've got a question, if you would put a Q in front of it, just so it helps me recognize that it's a question for our panelists. Well, Dave, with that being said, I know you didn't have any bullet points today, but I know that you got some updates on some stuff we have been talking about.
Sure. So let me start off, and it's not legislative or policy driven, but since the last time we chatted, registration is open for NMHC Student Housing Conference. We are back in Las Vegas. So you'll see up on the screen from October 7th to the 9th. So that is had opened up, and we've already got a good group of people that have registered. And we've got a lot of panels that we've already started to put together. So we're looking forward to that and working on hot and heavy on those things. In addition, a lot of you of interest is our OpTech conference, which I fully expect to probably set another record in terms of total attendance. That happens to be here in DC. That's a couple weeks later in early November. but any of your operational teams, et cetera. It's not just about multifamily, it's about anything that impacts any of your operations. So always a great show, and a great thing. And then shortly our annual conference opens up. So our meetings team is always super busy this time of the year in terms of getting things up and running for a bunch of the important conferences. So I just named the three that have the highest attendance for all three, and our meetings team is certainly handling all of those things. So let me give you a kind of a quick update from a legislative and regulatory perspective. A couple of things, whether you like to watch the Supreme Court or not, there were a couple of things that actually have the potential for impacting what we have been telling you guys for kind of over the last 2 years, that if you can't legislate stuff, you're going to regulate. And we've seen an avalanche of regulatory things coming out. And one of the important cases coming out of there, and you may have read about this, called Chevron. And Chevron had an EPA ruling dating back 40 years ago that was overturned by the Supreme Court. And that actually has the potential for impacting how agencies implement regulations. And the idea there is, have agencies overstep their boundaries if it's not specifically articulated by statute that's passed through legislation. So this is kind of an interesting thing and may have a little bit of an impact on what we see coming out of the regulatory agencies. And it has certainly carries the potential for reducing some of the things. We've not seen it right yet. I mean, this all just happened. So we expect that there may be something going forward. But in the meantime, what are some of the things that we're dealing with that have an impact on the student housing industry? We've mentioned some of these before. The FTC and the CFPB are very, very focused on what we, the two words that we hate are junk fees, but they call it junk fees. And this has an awful lot to do with your businesses in terms of how you actually charge students and their families for some fees. And so you have to be following this one pretty closely. We've submitted a number of letters to the CFPB already on this, and the FTC is also involved in this. So something that we're closely following, but do have a concern about how it may impact. So encourage everybody who's on that operations side, as well as at just application side, things that may have an impact on you. I literally 15 minutes before this meeting, I got an email from FHFA, who's the regulator of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And again, something dating back to last year, where we submitted to FHFA based on an open comment period for tenant protections. And we do expect something to come out soon. And I just got an invite for 3:30 this afternoon. So we will communicate that with you. So we do expect that some things will come out. We also have had some indications that it will not be as severe as we had some concerns about. So again, something we'll communicate, but something we've been certainly following a lot. Couple other things of interest, and we've mentioned this before, still things being crystallized, but right now a lot of congressional hearings on artificial intelligence. Right? Everybody's focused on this, everybody's talking about it. Congress is, I will call, nothing but other than scared what it means, and bad regulations for something they don't understand would be detriment to the industry. And student housing industry has always been kind of a leader in technology implementation. So it's something that we are closely following to make sure that it does not constrain that. And so something of deep importance. The second one, which again, we'd sent out a survey to a lot of our members that has to do with broadband and access within your properties, and digital discrimination, which certainly is something that the FCC was looking at, and there's some pretty onerous outcomes from that, which tells them that you need to let any carrier have access to your properties, even if you have some form of an agreement with a carrier. So those are just a couple things. There are some other things out there, but I'm going to leave it at that at the moment. Because we start to hit a summer slowdown, may not see much of an update between now and next month, but we'll keep you informed.
Well, fantastic. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I was actually had a to do note on my list to follow up with you about the FCC thing. So because I've actually got a couple of clients that we talked about it 4 or 5 months ago, I guess it was, and
Yep.
yeah, I just haven't heard much about it. So thanks for that.
Pretty impactful. And so we are just, be aware that we've filed a stay on that. So I think there's been a lot of other pushback. So hopefully this doesn't move forward, or at least they're delaying what they're and thinking more about what they're potentially proposing. So.
Well, great. Well, hey, I know we've got a little bit of a different panel coming up. Typically we have mostly operations folks on the national pre-leasing review, but we've got some folks from the brokerage and the finance side. I know Will was in DC yesterday. Just Will, Casey, any questions from your perspectives for Dave and NMHC on what's around the corner?
Always the big question we've got as regards to NMHC and FHFA is just workforce housing. It's obviously there's the big push right now with Fannie and Freddie on doing more mission driven, and the big struggle and frustration I have is how do we define mission within the student housing industry, because they look at that on a per unit basis rather than per bed. So if you have a 4-bedroom unit, the unit rent, combined unit rent, is counted toward the workforce as far as the calculation on AMI. So there are some student housing deals here and there, typically some of the older product where they have mostly 1 and 2 bedrooms that maybe do qualify for some mission. And the reason you want mission is because you get significantly better pricing on your interest rates from both Fannie and Freddie. So that's why student housing hasn't been the number one priority with the agencies, over the last 3 or 4 years, but they've still been a player, certainly a bit of a lesser of a player given that the increase in the life coast, but hoping they finish strong this year.
Well, I'll let you know what the call is about this afternoon. I'm sure you're interested in that.
Very much so.
It sounds like some things may be teeing up that will be some good discussions in October in Vegas. So
yep,
we'll see everybody there for sure. And one other thing with that, obviously mentioned registration opened a couple of weeks ago. Is there an early bird price with that?
Yeah, that runs up until September. I don't have the exact date, but it's usually about a month before.
Great. Well, Dave, we'll see you in September when we reconvene for Shop Talk. And if I don't talk to you before then, have a great rest of your summer.
Thanks, Wes. Appreciate it.
All right, take care. Well, Charlie, how are things going?
It's funny you just put up June 25th on there. I was like, that was.
There's just like
there's summer gone. No, man, it's we're doing good. I echo Dave's sentiments that it's hotter than Hades here in Atlanta. I know it's crazy. It's probably the hottest summer we've seen. But I wish I could say a little bit about the same about the leasing at the current, I guess, point in time we're at. Definitely, I'd say the last 18 months, my life was really easy. All good things, everything top and hit, historical levels reaching, X% higher than the previous. So definitely a little bit of a different story here as of the last 90 days, I would say, which definitely, those that last year may have been 100% and, not worrying about being able to enjoy their summer are now having to take a little bit of a closer look as we get through these last handful of weeks of this leasing season.
Well, hey, we'll get into the data in a minute and kind of see how things shaped up for the end of June. But as I was mentioning to Dave, typically we have operations and leasing and marketing folks on this particular panel, but we've kind of started a trend over the past couple of years of at least once or twice within the year, let's get folks that are, on the brokerage and finance side and executive level, from an operations standpoint. And let's, kind of talk about those three perspectives, around what's happening during the leasing cycle. So that is today's panel, and looking forward to catching up on, with these folks on some of the things that we've been talking about over the past year. And so with that being said, I'm going to just ask for a quick introduction from you guys. Will, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Wes. Will Baker, Senior Vice President with Walker & Dunlop. Been with the firm now for a little over 22 years. Got into student housing probably 20 years ago when the industry was clearly a bit smaller than it is now. But run the student housing finance for Walker & Dunlop based in Birmingham, Alabama. Currently in Annapolis and just down the street from Dave. And yes, it is a little warm, but happy to be here. But yeah, we focus mostly on Fannie and Freddie, although lately, given the emergence of life insurance companies in the student housing debt space, been doing a lot more life co debt as well. We also have preferred equity through a couple different buckets as well at Walker Dunlop.
Great. Jen?
Hey there, Jen Cassidy, President of Property Operations with Cardinal Group. Cardinal is based out of Denver. We are an owner, developer, and manager of student housing, multifamily, affordable, and build to rent. I joined Cardinal almost 4 years ago, but like Will, have been doing the student housing thing for about 20 years when the industry was much smaller. Cardinal's based in Denver, but I am based in very humid, very hot Tampa, Florida.
Casey?
Hey, Wes, thanks for having me. Casey Schaefer, SVP at CBRE, CB's National Student Housing Platform. The investment sales and debt and structured finance platforms are based in Dallas, but we cover the country for CB, all things student housing. So glad to be here.
Well, great. Well, Charlie, let's. I'm interested. This is what we've been tracking this year, going back to October, as far as the year-over-year pre-leasing trend. So looking at velocity compared year over year. We started seeing some things in February where it was falling behind year over year. Nothing that was too concerning. And then last month we actually saw it, kind of the gap kind of close a little bit. So interested in finding out what we've got to talk about today as far as where we're going to end up putting a pin on things. So
Yes.
you want to go through the data first?
Yeah, let's set the stage for the discussion. I think for those in the audience, putting some context to things, with last year being a record year, velocity, I think the peak was roughly about like 12% year over year from AY 21-22 to AY 22-23. That spread between, we'll show you a graph here in a second, but generally speaking, we have definitely seen a tempered leasing velocity here over the last, call it 3-4 months. A lot of ideas around why, what's causing that. Again, we're going to get into that with the people who know more than I do. But as we look at, at the end of June, so this is as of June 28th, obviously not much change with the 4th being last week, or July 1st, excuse me. National pre-lease at 82.4%. That's about 4% behind year over year. So this time last year,
Okay.
would be 86.4%. And where you're seeing a lot of that is really tied to kind of two corridors or two regions in the U.S. in the Southeast and the Southwest. A lot of your more traditional markets, the Midwest is kind of roughly in pace. And again, the West always is a little bit behind just when the leasing velocity or the school year starts. So, we've seen, it was kind of flat. And then I think it was February, we started to see a dip below. And definitely, some of these markets, and speaking with customers and, different people in the industry, they're standstills, single digit leases signed in weeks and really driving the question about what's going on. So as we look though at rates specifically, and again, we'll put this in the context of time here. But if we go to the next slide here, Wes, and we look at from a rate growth perspective, you're still seeing, what traditionally would be outsized rent growth. 6% Southeast, 6% Southwest, Midwest, roughly 8%. The Northeast and the West, again, higher dollar perspective from a change, but again, percentage basis a little bit lower. We've seen now the last two, and I'd say the latter half of the 21-22 leasing year, some elevated rent increases, and a lot of that on the tailwinds of what happened in conventional multifamily back in 21-22. But you're still seeing, a lot of these markets still seeing strong rent growth. A lot of the dips that we're starting to see now is, I wouldn't say a last ditch effort, but we, for lack of a better word, dropping rents significantly to try and shoot for some of those occupancies. I was actually ran an analysis internally of about the 30, for round numbers, 3,200 stabilized beds we track. There's still or properties we track, there's about plus or minus 1,200 that are still 70% or below from a leasing velocity standpoint. So the latter half, though, a lot of those are still in the, at what I would say the national average or performing well. So every market's different. Every market's the same. But generally speaking, still strong fundamentally. We're just, not at the same pace we were last year, which again was all-time highs. So as we look at that, and I mentioned, you can see how the data shows specifically I'd say the teal, if that's the right color, line there. Where this time last year about 905, but you saw that, went from 825 to 905. That's about call it an $80 increase, about call it roughly 10%, give or take. Where again, that gap is starting to actually dip down. This is the first time we've started to see rents decline, kind of holistically speaking. But again, if you look at that in comparison to the last couple of years, I mean, still significant, run up as it relates to the industry in general.
Yeah.
And then pre-leasing perspective, as mentioned, it's same teal line looking at the orange. That's your big gap in leasing. So the last 2 years, everything's been so hot out of the gate. I mean, by the turn of the year, the market's almost 50%, where in previous years, it was 30, 35%. So you had a ton of velocity on the back half of the leasing cycle, which again, drove, to the 92, 93, 94% from a national perspective on occupancy. This year, we're sitting at 82.4, where this time last year, again, you saw a little bit of temperament from the leasing, over the last couple months, getting into kind of the first week of September. But generally speaking, is that gap going to be made up? Are we going to see this mass influx in velocity? That's what we're here to discuss today. And taking, I guess, a little bit of a deeper dive. Again, a lot of this has been, relatively similar, but, we're seeing a lot of the challenges related to pricing. So if you look at the studios 1s and 2s, you got about the studios almost an 8% decrease in year-over-year velocity, where you're seeing a little bit, a tempered, 2, 3, 4% on the larger unit type. So again, pulling into the idea of price point. Studios 1s and 2s being all above $1,000 on a per bed basis, where your larger unit types, 3s, 4s, 5s, and 6s, I guess some of the 6s in the newer inventory have reached that point, but cheaper to live with friends versus, by yourself or one of the roommate. We're not going to make you do math, as always. I'm kind like that, so you can see how this kind of compares from a velocity standpoint, as well as from a percentage growth basis on rents. If you go to the next one too. So all in all, again, you're seeing still the high 6% in the 3s and 4s, which again are the largest unit types we're seeing from a concentration perspective. So still strong, still in a positive position. But again, it's not last year. And we're definitely seeing some slowdowns in some markets where it's kind of a head scratcher as to why. So also, I don't want to jump ahead on the FAFSA side. We're going to get into that here in a second. But, bringing our panel into the equation, Jen, the data says one thing. What's the, Cardinal's got a very expansive platform, coast to coast, east to west, north to south. What is the general trends that you're seeing, whether it's from a market perspective, university tier? So is it a large state school or a private school? Talk me through kind of what your experience and what you're seeing in talking with your teams throughout the country.
Yeah, for sure. I did want to acknowledge to Wes's point, typically these are panels full of operators, and I love the opportunity to get to see Will and Casey. And also, I know there's so many on-site team members that listen to ShopTalk, and it's just a great opportunity to understand how all of these things go together. I'm obviously speaking most pertinently to the on-site team members' perspective on what we're seeing in the field, but obviously everything we do affects the ability for the real estate to transact. So I think it kind of brings it full circle. I thought you pointed out some really interesting things, Charlie. I think the FAFSA headline is obviously very prominent right now. It's a big point of discussion in that it is so significantly behind year over year. However, it would be easy to say, impacts from that are just tertiary markets, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. I also think there's kind of a confluence of a lot of things happening this year. So if you zoom out and you look at the floor plans, I thought you made a great point. It's the studios 1s and 2s, while a smaller subset of the housing stock in student housing are typically the first floor plans to go. And we have definitely seen price sensitivity in those floor plans. And in some cases, and I would say a lot of cases, that's more prominent in urban markets where conventional rents have come down, and the spread between student and conventional is either very small or non-existent, and thus making it more competitive or just competitive in general to live in conventional housing. I think as an operator, the key there is the value proposition for living in student housing and the experience proposition for living in student housing. But I do think that is impactful to what we're seeing happening in those studios and 1s. I will definitely say in terms of FAFSA and what we see across our portfolio, secondary and tertiary markets are the most impacted. How significantly, still very hard to tell. Those markets were typically lower occupied to begin with, and have students that are more highly dependent on financial aid. So whether or not their enrollments will be significantly down is unclear. Will they be later? Those schools are typically later to begin with, but we're definitely seeing some challenges. I don't think it's a secret. Arizona, Tempe's been really, really impacted by this. I think Arizona put $500,000 behind a program to push people to get FAFSAs completed. So I wouldn't say the impacts of this are one size fits all. And honestly, what makes it challenging at this point to understand is just how impactful this will be. So we've seen tremendous progress with the FAFSA difference in applications since April. I think that number peaked at like 660,000 less applications year over year in April. That's down to like 250,000 now. So some good progress has been made. But it'll be interesting come October to understand like where is enrollment, what were those impacts. And so I would say 4% down nationally. Nobody wants to be talking about occupancy being down. It's been a great 3 years. But if you look at the chart that you showed with 4 years kind of layered over each other, we are tracking to 22, 23 in terms of where pre-leasing is at. And I would say that wasn't
we were all excited about that year when we were in the middle of it, right?
in hindsight, right? That was a pretty good year. And if you look at the rent growth, I think rent growth that year was around 3.6, 3.7%, whereas this year you're still seeing tracking to 6.4. So it's easy to look at last year and say, rent growth was 10% and occupancy was 94%, and this isn't that year. And I think that is true. However, I'm very optimistic that it won't be a terrible year. 6.4% rent growth and ideally above 90%, hopefully 91, 92, I think would be a good outcome. But obviously it's July 11th and we would all love to see that national pre-leasing trending above 85%. So I think, right now teams are focusing on turn, but they're still very, very focused on leasing, lead conversion, generating leads. So it is absolutely going to be a very busy summer on site in most places.
Jim, let me ask you a question. Just and this isn't anything I prepped you for, so get ready. but I've been doing looking at some research recently in regards to demographics for grad students, and thinking about what you were talking about with the some of the trends you're seeing on floor plans. What I'm seeing nationally, of course, we saw a big uptick in graduate enrollment, coming off of the pandemic. Some of that was universities trying to make up for the loss of international students and that type of thing. But we're also seeing that the age group of those grad students going down as well. And one thing that, and some of my colleagues that I've been speaking with that have been looking at the Reddit subreddits for the school, is that we're hearing more and more that there are grad students that are, because typically we didn't have a lot of focus on grad students unless if they were full time. But reading some of these subreddits, they seem to be really interested in staying, not necessarily in the 4, 5, 6 bedroom type of units that have been built close to campus, but they want to stay closer to campus, and they want to stay in lease by the bed type of structure. Are your team seeing that? Is that a point of discussion you're seeing in any markets?
Yeah, I would say we've definitely seen grad students staying longer historically. I think just the convenience, right, that purpose-built student housing offers. I do think, however, that pricing has played a role, and when multi-rents were really, really increasing, you saw more of that desire to stay, or grad students living in purpose-built housing. So not surprising, as the spread has narrowed, to see maybe some opting not to. What's unique about that is we have communities where we're like all studios, and ones where we might have 90% grad school population. Where it gets a little tricky from an operator's perspective is you got everything from studios to sixes. Your demographic living in those studios and ones compared to who's living in a 6-bedroom can be very, very different. So from a community aspect, the programming aspect, there's a big management component of making sure you're kind of providing an enjoyable community experience to everyone.
Yeah.
But I do think, yes, I think definitely grad students, typically we are seeing a population of that within our communities. In some markets, a significant population.
And from what I'm seeing, it seems to be more the markets are more of the the urban metropolitan. No, I shouldn't say really metropolitan, but your UNC Charlotte's, that's probably not the right example to use right now, but those type of markets, where you've got a big base of college students that are, or grad students who are working locally and deciding to stay in school as well. So but they're, instead of moving to downtown Charlotte, they're wanting to stay in around that university area. Charlotte's actually a bad example of that, but for those that know the market, can visualize it like I can. So, but anyway, I guess that was kind of my question. Are you seeing it more in those type of markets, or is it more of the?
No, it's definitely the urban market. So I would say Philly. We manage a couple deals in Philly. That's a very prominent trend. Austin, Denver. Definitely urban markets.
Yeah. Well, hey, you wanted to jump in and talk a little bit about some of this fast food stuff that you were teasing a little bit. I wanted to get your kind of your thoughts on this, because as you mentioned, we're basically, I think the latest numbers were 11.6% behind year over year as far as completions, and that's completions from seniors. So this doesn't include transfers and that type of thing. And to look at that from the year previous, when it was under the old 108 question form, we started, of course, those always went out in October. You can see, so going back to basically fall of 22, they were 15% ahead year over year. That eventually falls down to about 3.1, and then compared to this year, where they didn't even get off the block until January, and they're not even measuring it here until January, until March. Like you said, they've made a huge over the past 3 months, 4 months. They've made a huge amount of progress on getting caught up. And that's cost a lot of money because in May they basically paid out about $50 million. The government paid out about $50 million to counselors and things like that to get them to work, to hire more counselors, and to bring some other groups in to help students complete that process and get things pushed through. But yeah, that 11.6% basically, comes out to about 250,000 less students. What are your thoughts on, has the system lost those students? Or do you think they'll pop up here before the end of the year?
I wish I had the definitive answer to that question. What we've seen is week over week, that negative 11.6 has obviously improved. That improvement has definitely slowed down. So we were seeing, 2% improvement a week. It slowed to 0.7. This past week, it was 0.2. So what does appear to be certain to me is this won't be flat year over year. I think that's pretty definitive. We can say that now. The question is obviously, have we lost some of these students for a semester? Are they going to find other ways to pay for school this year? But obviously there's concerns about a domino effect of this. I think also it's very hard because we have one piece of the puzzle, right? This is just high school senior completions. It doesn't tell us about other existing college students, but what we do know is the slowdown and the movement of the timing of this affected existing students understanding what they were going to get in financial aid from the universities in some cases, which does have impacts on other students, especially those that are highly dependent on financial aid. So I think it'll be really important this fall to really pay attention to what's happening in enrollment. I do think we'll continue to see improvements in FAFSA, but where we'll end up, I don't know. I think the other interesting piece is like high school seniors applying. That's typically obviously impacting incoming freshmen. A lot of schools we operate at have live-on requirements for first-year freshmen. So in theory, you would expect this wouldn't impact the off-campus student housing market as much. However, if universities aren't filling, they are obviously taking more upperclassmen than they typically have in the past. So there's a lot to understand here. And I think obviously there's some good sources of data to track this, but we won't have definitive answers, until the fall. And we also won't know if there is a decrease in enrollment. Is this something we're going to live with for 4 years? Is it temporary? So I think it'll be really interesting come October. Maybe we'll be having this conversation again with some better information. But I do think in terms of just how we look at things, it's important to pay attention to everything in terms of how we're marketing our communities, we're maintaining our communities, the experience we're providing, and that no stone is left unturned in terms of our value proposition to on-campus housing, conventional, shadow market. And so as someone that's done this a long time, and obviously Will said the same thing, like the current competitive nature of the market we're in is not new to me, but for some of our on-site teams, this may be the first time they've been operating on-site where it has been this competitive. So it's all about just knowing your market, knowing your product, and how to be competitive in a market. And I think what we can do is focus on what we can control. And we can't control this right now. So we've got to focus on the controllables for the best outcome we can have.
Yeah, and I want to put this question out to the site managers that are in the audience, and if you're a regional and you've got some info on it, this would feel free to put it in the chat. But I was in Price Company's offices earlier this week, and Chelsea Harper, who was on ShopTalk in May, we were talking about Clemson and trying to figure out where the students were in Clemson, and because it was really odd. I mean, there didn't seem to be a FAFSA issue or anything like that. And of course, one of the things that had been announced was that they pushed everything back because of FAFSA issues. They pushed everything back for on-campus assignments to, I think, June 15th. And so Chelsea was there when I walked into the conference room, and the first question was, well, how are we doing in Clemson? And she said that, they've picked up quite a bit in the past few weeks. So, would love to hear from site managers, kind of what you're seeing, in your markets and with your universities, if they've, seemed to finish that process up, because that happens, typically much earlier in the spring. But anyway, I think I've talked about FAFSA enough. I don't know if I ever want to bring it up again. Can we move to brokerage and talk about what's happening on the brokerage side, Charlie and Casey?
Yeah. Let's get
Love
Casey
to.
up for us today. Let's get him involved here. No, I think Jen, those are great perspectives, and I think the big thing is like you can't just peanut butter. This is the problem across all these markets. I think everyone's unique, and the large multifamily pipelines they're given or deliveries of the last couple of years are giving away multiple month gift cards, and so generally speaking, outside of those nuances, it's new for this year. Things are in a pretty strong position, which is why Will and Casey are so busy. So Casey, kind of jumping over to you on how all this kind of correlates to the investment sales, the brokerage side, the lovely world of wheeling and dealing. How, I guess, from a direct asset sales, and again, we're not going to talk about the recaps here, but how has volume been trending this year in relation to last year? Obviously, I know based on our calls that we had back in February that things were down a little bit, but give me some perspective from your seat on how the investment community is looking at things.
Yeah, sure, Charlie. And as you mentioned, there's always recap activity happening in the background, but just straight sales, investment sales. Last year, first half was about $2.5 billion, and 23 as a whole about 60% lower than 22. Just for larger context, right now, through June of 24, slightly behind first half of 23. I do think that's going to pick up based on or similar thoughts to what's going on with leasing. A lot of owners are waiting on these rent rolls to finalize, right? So one question Wes had in our prep call was if a number of assets were teed up for fall closing. I think there's some of that. Certainly we have a few, but some of those are predicated on leasing finalizing, these properties filling. But I think a lot of people are waiting to get these rent rolls finalized in line with the conversation we've had on this call so far. But I would say we're busy right now. Everybody's busy, but we've turned 31 BOVs in the last 30 days. We've got 17 more we're trying to turn by the end of next week. So that's busy. We've closed 4 assets in the last week, and then we've been awarded 9. So those won't come out immediately, but those will come out kind of late July, early August. So there's going to be, I think it will be a busier second half. But yeah, certainly slower up to this point in the year.
Definitely. And Baker, I know a lot of the agencies need that finalized rent roll to leverage on the underwriting side, and the life codes may be operating a little differently. How has the I guess the debt markets kind of reacted to a lot of this? Obviously, I know Casey mentioned that there's been a ton of recap activity for sure. But give me your perspective on what you're seeing. I know interest rates. I know we got a little bit of help on the 10-year the last couple of weeks. When I saw you in DC, we saw it trickling down, which was nice. Give me
Bill, just to recap, when you were on in September, you said the previous 12 months had been the slowest you'd seen in student housing.
Yeah, I did.
The 10 months that have come after that, how has that specifically worked out?
Wes, I will say marginally better, not nearly as big of a pickup as we had hoped, because after I said that, you may recall, rates started to trickle down. And so, all of us on the lending side are like, all right, let's go. Game on. Here we go. We're entering this lower rate environment. It's going to keep trickling down. And it was a little bit of a tease because the rates kind of trickled right back up on the first part of the year in 24. So, and of course, there was still that bid-ask gap spread between buyers and sellers that didn't help matters either. So I would say, marginally better, not nearly as much of a pickup first half of 24 as we had hoped. I will say from the agency standpoint, Freddie Mac had a very big Q1. Fannie Mae, not so much, but before COVID, Fannie and Freddie just dominated the perm market. They probably did over 3/4 of all perm deals, for that decade leading up to COVID. Since COVID, Life cos and debt funds have really stepped up. 2022 was really the debt fund year, the banks to some extent. But over the last year, life companies have really eaten into the market share for perm debt that the agencies used to dominate. They've been able to, I'd say the first half of this year, they've had a little bit of advantage over the agencies because they can underwrite future income. So if you have a deal in March that's 90 to 100% pre-leased for the upcoming fall, some of the life companies can give you some underwriting credit and proceeds for that NOI, the future NOI that's not been realized yet. Whereas Fannie and Freddie need to see the heads and beds. They need to see at least T1 or T2 in order to underwrite. They're in place cash flow lenders. So that said, that advantage the life companies enjoyed the first half of the year is down. Is going to diminish here the back half of the year because we're pretty close to August, and this is usually the time when the agencies step back up. Last fall, they Freddie Mac did some. Fannie Mae steps up for some of the larger structured deals, maybe larger one-offs or portfolio transactions. They've got a great credit facility product for a cross-collateralized, cross-securitized product for some of their top sponsors, and so they're very competitive in that particular product type for student housing. It's kind of the general one-off flow business, kind of $10 to $50 million deals. Generally, I think Freddie Mac is. And the life insurance companies have been more competitive on those type of deals. But the good news is rates have been moving around. Some of y'all saw this morning the inflation data was great. We had our little slight downtick in inflation, first time since 2020. So that's huge news. And the market responded with a 9.5 basis point drop in Treasury. So we're down to a 4.2, 4.19 right now. So you look at spreads kind of in the 160 to 180 range. We're sub 6. On a 5 to 10 year fixed rate deal. So you can get positive leverage right now in the financing market for student housing, which is huge. There was a time when positive leverage was almost impossible. Now it is possible, and certainly more possible if you take advantage of what a lot of lenders are offering and buy down. You can buy your rate down, 1 to 3 points potentially. We just look at, we've seen spreads in the 150s. If you buy it down a couple of points. And so, 150 on top of a 419 Treasury, you're sitting at 575. It's not a bad rate right now with some interest only. So there's good terms out there. We just need Casey to start selling some more of these deals so we can start financing more. And I think that will pick up come September.
Yeah, we just had a competitive process, Will, between agencies and Lifeco. And Lifeco won out 5-year full-term IO. Matched on leverage, beat one on rate and IO. So they're really competitive right now. And on term right now, it seems to be the 5 is still what everyone wants. Back in the day, it was the kind of the standard 10-year fixed, 9.5 yield maintenance. That's all anyone wanted. Maybe a 7 here and there. Then in 2022, it was all floaters. Right now, it's all 5-year fixed. A few 7 and 10s here and now, but 5-year fixed. Sometimes a little bit more open on the prepay schedule because people want to maintain flexibility in case they get a big offer, 3 years down the road, or they may want to refinance if they think we're going to be in a lower rate environment. So that's the vast majority of what we're working on right now is 5-year fixed.
So let's move over to instead of talking about this past year, let's talk about kind of starting to hit on some predictions for the future. So let's talk about this next academic cycle. And Jen, I want to go, back to you on operations. After going through, this cycle, I know your teams are busy working on marketing plans for the next cycle. How is this academic cycle impacting what you guys are putting in those marketing plans for next year?
Yeah, well, I think one of the keys to this year, the success we've seen in a large majority of our portfolio is how early we started. And I think what you saw in the rent increase, that 6.4%, being smart about looking at your rent roll and having a more of a mark to market strategy versus just setting a rate at a floor plan. It's understanding, your rent roll component and, people that sign the highest versus where, people may have gotten a more significant discount. So I know I said earlier, everyone's going to be busy still leasing and preparing for turn, but the other piece is making sure you're ready to go early. In some of these markets, we have people asking about renewals on move-in day. I mean, markets where historically, they've been leased up 3 months in, Knoxville is an example. people understand that the best product goes quickly. And so being prepared with rates, making sure you got your leases ready to go. And, I always feel like this might sound very old fashioned, but the first 6 weeks is critical to your residents' experience. So making sure you're ready to go with great resident events, the properties look great. Move-in should always be like that celebration, that first impression. But I think I don't expect the fall to shoot out the gates quite as quickly as it did this past year. I think anytime you see what we're seeing this spring, where there is beds available, students know that, right? And they know that maybe they don't have to commit as early. So it's so important to make sure you're focusing on the experience, and then also just brand is everything, right? Like your reputation, the association with your brand, making sure your brand's out in the market. I mean, that's a big thing for new developments. We're managing 12 that open in about 6 weeks. And, you've got for new developments for 2025, we're already out in market. So making sure that brand penetration, they've got to see your brand, they've got to know who you are before you're really starting to lease. So I think it's just truly making sure you're ready to go. And then just being really strategic with the renewals and providing the experience where students are like, why would I want to look elsewhere? I want to stay here.
Yeah.
So I think that's the key. So, I said it earlier, there's just a lot of different activities happening right now between finishing out this leasing season, getting ready for the next one, and then just making sure, again, you're executing on a really great turn.
Back in September, you expressed some concern about the tiered system for renewals specifically. Just because we're looking at 8% increases right out of the gates, and that is so tough to go directly to your residents that may have just moved in, or maybe they've been with you for a couple of years, and talk about those those rent hikes that you can get from a new student or from a new resident. And for this year, you think that's coming out of the gate that's going to be as tough for renewals, or do you think they'll be offered things that are a little bit more what we expect to offer renewals at the beginning of the year?
I never think it's a one size fits all, right? So
Sure.
I think if you provide a great experience, if the communities are well maintained and there's a value to living there, the price point is going to be reflective of that. And we're facing a lot with uncontrollables, right? Insurance costs are higher, real estate tax costs are higher, so owners have to increase rent to support those non-controllable costs. But I think being smart, right? Like, I'm not a fan of a 3-bedroom cost this. We've got to be smart with how we price, how we look at kind of the in-place rent roll and all of that. So I think it'll be not just market by market, but community by community. It's so important to understand where you fit in a market, your value proposition, and also just the compilation of your rent roll. Like, if you're sitting on a community where you have 40% graduating seniors, you're going to be going out to the market for more new leases. And so your strategy needs to be reflective of that. So I think it's just really important to be in tune with that right now, and setting strategy right now. And obviously we do a ton of third-party management. So we're having those client conversations very actively right now, making sure that we're equipped and ready to go for the fall.
Yeah. Yeah. So Casey, last summer there were a lot of, I think the way Chris Epp described it was he had a monument of dead OMs that he, the ownership groups that were saying, you know what, we'll just pack it up and wait another year and, get these great rent increases that we were coming out at the beginning. I'm kind of wondering how many of those folks are coming back, and I'm wondering, what kind of cap rates they're looking at this go around.
Yeah, for a long time, Wes, people were waiting on rates to come down. And, starting back in 22, it was, well, if we just wait 6 to 9, 12 months, rates will be lower, and then I'll go sell. Well, then it didn't happen in 23. And in 23, it was, well, I just got 10% rent growth. I'm just using the national average. I'm going to go get another year of rent growth in 24, and then we'll see what happens. Hopefully rates will be lower. The 10-year is actually higher right now than it was a year ago. Obviously, I don't think anybody expects a spike to a 5% 10-year treasury in October this year, like what happened last fall. But I think I think people have decisions to make. People have wanted to transact for a long time, and they're going to be looking at what Jen just talked about. What kind of realistic rent growth am I looking at for 25, 26, and is it worth waiting another year to get that rent growth, and achieve pricing based on those new rents, or do I just go now? And I think a lot of people are having those conversations, and part of it's waiting on just making sure they get full this year, like we've been talking about. But yeah, I mean, look, Will mentioned weak CPI number this morning. Treasuries came down. Treasuries have kind of priced in the cuts that are expected, but right now the market's pricing in an 85% chance of a cut in September. I don't think that does anything for Treasuries immediately, but I do think it changes the mindset of investors to be just the mentality of the market being somewhat more risk on, knowing that we're entering a cutting cycle. So we'll see, how all that shakes out. But I think people have a lot of people are going to have conversations once these rent rolls get finalized in August of, is it time to finally go after waiting for 2-3 years?
Thank you for saying that, Casey. I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had with people to say, just because the Fed cuts 25 pips does not mean that's going to be a corresponding drop.
It's not a direct correlation. Yeah, no,
right.
It's not a direct correlation.
Not. And I think a lot of people thought just when the Fed started the increasing cycle, yes, that did cause an
Oh, did we lose Will?
To 3.5 or whatever it is. Like you said, the market is baking in the cut now. So what you?
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, the bond market's already priced in future cuts. I mean, I think what's exciting looking at the way the market's pricing cuts is it's like 6 or 7 between now and next fall. If that happens, you're looking at it's 150, 175 basis points of cuts on SOFR, and that'll help a lot. So we'll take it in stride.
Yeah, I think it'll also bring a lot of the people who are on the sidelines for what their yield needs to be back in the marketplace too. I think there's a lot of the larger institutions, just in talking with them, that they can't stomach negative leverage, and a lot of the stuff that's your core plus assets may be trading with a slight delta between the two. But in speaking with, and not trying to transact with a property buy or sell, it's more, hey, we feel pretty strongly about the way that the world's moving, and the fundamentals of student housing as well, tying into, hey, if interest rates drop, we're back in the game, ready to deploy. And I think Wes, Chris Epp coined the term practice listings, which was what he spent the majority of his last.
Oh yeah, he was getting really good at his trade, but he was not actually making any money. So,
well, I'll tell you guys. I mean, we've done more BOVs year to date than maybe any other year. I mean, I've been here almost a decade with the CB team. Was actually an asset before that, but we've done more BOVs year to date this year than any year. I mean, just quickly looking at how many we've done, and people are hesitant to pull the trigger and make decisions, but that is gonna. There won't be a dam that breaks and this flood of assets hits the market. I don't expect that, but I do think slowly the amount of offerings coming out to the market and volume overall will begin to increase.
Well, guys, I think we lost Will. I know he was having to call in from his iPad, so maybe he didn't have it charging or something. But anyway, we're at the top of the hour. I want to thank you guys for being a part of this panel, and once again, I think it's great for the typical attendees that we have for Shop Talk are certainly on the operation side, and this is not necessarily a conversation that they're used to every day. So I know it's been great for them to kind of absorb it and see what's coming from certainly Casey and Will from your perspective. So thanks so much for the time in that. Jen, as always, thanks for sharing your operations expertise.
Thanks for having me. It was good to see you guys.
Well, guys, I want to really quick wish or let everybody know that we don't have Shop Talk for August. So have a great turn, and may the odds be ever in your favor. I know I've got a lot of folks that that I'm going to be seeing in the next couple of weeks who actually have move out day on Monday. So looking forward to jumping in with them and getting some units ready for move in a couple of weeks. So everybody be careful, be safe, and we will see you in September. If we've brought you any value today, please share Shop Talk with your colleagues. Please have them go to shoptalk.info and they can register there to get our monthly invites to this webinar. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you in September.
Thank you, Wes.
Wes, Charlie, Jen,
Yeah.
enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.